Hi, everybody. How we all doing here today? Let's get right into the slides. I am tired today. I don't know how else to put it. Long week, and we got class tomorrow. I'll hopefully be a little bit more on my game for tomorrow. Today, we are talking about understanding autism for FFT 115 Week 3, a topic that is near and dear to me. I am the brother of an individual with autism, so something that kind of led me into the path of special education as we speak. Agenda for today, we're going to be talking about strategies for classroom success and effective use of teacher supports for students who have an autism spectrum disorder. We're going to look at some connections, UDL resources, what is ASD or autism spectrum disorder, some strategies of working with students who have this diagnosis, and then some exit ticket and cafe time. I will say that throughout the course of this particular slideshow, there is a lot of link resources in regards to working with students who have an autism spectrum disorder. As I go through it, I will point them out, such as right here, tools for universal design learning for students with autism spectrum disorders. Connection, if we were in class in person, we would have a choice for this. I choose to skip this. We will go right into the meat and potatoes of our subject. So, what is ASD? Autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disorder that impacts the way individuals communicate and interpret their environment, often resulting in challenges with social interactions and processing information. The DSM criteria for an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis is that an individual has persistent deficits in their social communication and social interaction across contexts. They have restricted or perhaps repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. This might include stereotyped or repetitive motor movements, insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines, or ritualized patterns or non-verbal behavior. Highly restricted fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. Hyper or hypo reactivity to sensory input or unusual interests. Symptoms must be present in early childhood, and symptoms cause clinically significant impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of current functioning. I take this moment to point out that in the slideshow notes, we do have a couple of websites here in regards to autism. One that is specifically Autism Speaks, a very good resource for discussing what is autism, where you can get help and information in regards to working with individuals with autism, or perhaps your family has an individual who has autism. What they do, get involved. Lots of good stuff there over at Autism Speaks. And we have another understood.org link here as well. Another great website. We've talked about that one before in regards to autism. Going on. 1 in 44 8-year-old children were identified with autism in 2018. I've seen numbers bandied about all over the place in regards to how many people in the world have some form of an autism diagnosis. I've seen it as much as 1 in 18 in some studies. But in the 1 in 44 number sounds about right. That would mean roughly about one individual in every 1.5 to 2 full classroom sizes will have an autism diagnosis of some sort or another. And as we see, we have more links on this particular slide as well, including a CDC link that gives more information in regards to this. Here's a nice little checklist from Autism Speaks, the Autism Symptoms Checklist. 6 or more symptoms from 1, 2, or 3. Any of these things might be used in order to diagnose an autism from a clinician or someone who has the ability to do that, a counselor. Um, we also see some other little things here about Rett's disorder and childhood disintegrative disorder. The symptoms are not better accounted for by. These are some things that might be typically associated with autism, but is not autism. If you want to see what those exactly mean, you can click on the links there to find out what Rett syndrome is about. I have worked with an individual with Rett syndrome before. It's similar to autism, but not exactly autism. Never worked with anybody with childhood disintegrative disorder. That's a new one on me, actually. Never seen this one before. But here is some links in regards to those particular diagnoses as well. But yes, that checklist right here can give you some of the ideas of what we are looking at when we're talking about autism. Going on, some of the most famous individuals in the world that we know of who had an autism diagnosis. This includes Albert Einstein, Andy Warhol. We see the depiction of Tom Cruise with, who was his name? It's not De Niro. Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man. We see Mozart. No, not Mozart. Beethoven, but Mozart also had it as well. We see Alexis Weinman, Miss Montana of 2012, and a Miss America contestant. Daryl Hannah. Daryl Hannah is known to have autism. Temple Grandin, very famous American scientist. And we see a depiction of an individual with autism, Max from Parenthood, is what we're seeing there. Today, strategies for classroom success. Secondary school environments can be challenging for students with ASD. Transitions require multiple changes and predictable and yet still unpredictable. Sights and sounds of hallways, noise and commotion can be very overwhelming for individuals with autism. After navigating the hallways, students are often stressed or unsettled when coming into a classroom. It kind of goes hand in hand with transitions. Students with ASD often have difficulty picking out important information from the environment and understanding what it is that they are supposed to do or not supposed to do. If you are in class, in the chat box, unmute and share. What are the aspects of your school, if you are teaching or are a paraeducator, that may make it a challenging environment for students with ASD? For myself, when I think of my own classroom, I try to keep my classroom as muted without as much stuff on the walls as I possibly can. However, I have aides who are in the back of the classroom who have their own little areas and they like to set up their own little areas their own ways, which is fine and great. I fully get it. But it can be a little messy and a little distracting, or for someone who might have a hypersensitivity to those kind of things, might make those things difficult. I do have a nice little quiet area, though, that's right next to my classroom. It's outside where a student can relax, put on maybe some noise-canceling headphones. I have a student right now who has an autism diagnosis inside my classroom. He likes to go out there and do his work outside. He says it helps him. And it looks like it is. So that's one of the things I'm kind of thinking about when I wrap my brain around this. But think about those things. What kind of things might be challenging or not challenging in your classroom right now with students with ASD inside your classroom or school? How can we support students with ASD in the classroom and school? Tonight's objectives, we're going to identify and use elements of classroom structure that will assist most students, including those with and without autism. Find ways to incorporate 5 key student supports into the classroom, and identify support available to help brainstorm, solve problems, and plan. I want to throw this out there, that very first bullet point where it says we're going to identify and use elements of classroom structure that will assist most students, including those with and without autism. A lot of the things that might help your students with autism could actually help your students without autism as well, as they are generally good strategies to use anyway inside of a classroom. Such as structure. We all want structure inside of our classrooms. Almost any and every student thrives with a well-maintained classroom that has a well-maintained routine, that has a well-maintained set of expectations for the individuals inside your class. Structure makes information accessible, spells out where homework goes and where to get materials for the day. Structure provides structure. No, structure provides structure. Provides structure, makes the tasks' expectations clear. Everybody knows what's expected of them. They know what their daily routine is. It creates a predictable classroom environment, and all these things does help every student. I have routine in my classroom every day. Everybody knows what my schedule is. Everybody knows what I'm generally going to do. If I'm going to do something different, I front load the heck out of it to make sure students are aware that things might be different. Okay? That's a big thing when we're talking about students with autism disorders. Let's take a look at some of those classroom supports real quick.
Mrs. Redfern is going to come at the end of the class because you're going to be doing research.
For students with autism, structure in the classroom is critical.
Most individuals with autism get extremely anxious and non-productive in chaotic environments. They are much more organized themselves when they're in organized environments and when task expectations are clear and can be laid out in front of them visually.
When you walk in my classroom, I provide a list of goals on the board. The homework is very clearly listed. I give an opportunity for students to see that. I talk a little bit about that. I talk about the homework. Mrs. Redfern is going to...
No, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to this one. Hypersensitivity. So while as routine and structure is very important, understanding hyper and sometimes hypo sensitivities with your students with autism is an important thing to recognize as well, as we will see in this video.
For most secondary school students, the classroom is a comfortable environment for learning. That's not always the case for students with autism. For them, the classroom may present a number of visual and auditory distractions. Teachers should be aware of this, particularly when deciding on a seating plan. Some students may struggle unless they sit near the visual supports at the front of the class. Others may find seats near the windows too distracting, or may be bothered by the classroom lighting.
One thing that makes it hard is my hypersensitivity. I have a low sense. I'm very sensitive to light and loud noises, which it seems a lot of kids my age like.
Sometimes the child can have a support that makes fluorescent lights a little more tolerable, such as, wearing a baseball cap, wearing sunglasses, or even sitting in a certain area of the room.
A well-structured, predictable classroom can provide comfort for students with autism. This includes creating clear physical and visual boundaries.
Then art centers are a big idea where you have the glue guns in a spot. That is where you go to use the glue gun. You have a saw in a spot. That is where you go to use the saw. And they like that kind of structure.
All right.
For most secondary schools...
I did it again. Oops, I did it again. All right, consider potential auditory and visual challenges when working with your students with an autism spectrum disorder. Examples of these challenges can include sitting too close to windows, hallway doors, specific students, radios playing, message flickering on TV screen, and fluorescent lights. And while I was thinking about it, I think I am going to show another quick lesson in regards to this stuff. Well, not a lesson, but a video in regards to this. This is a great little video in regards to sensory overload and what it might look like for a student with an ASD inside a classroom or just out in the general world, what kind of things they might think or feel while they're wandering about. Are you overloaded? I know I am. That was a lot right there, and I can only imagine what it is for an individual who has to deal with that on a daily basis. Some of the things we work with every day, and I myself kind of take it for granted. I'm able to mute things if I need to. But for those individuals out there who can't, it makes life difficult, and we need to be able to consider these things, especially when we're talking about getting our classroom set up. If you're dealing, I shouldn't say dealing, if you're working with students who have an autism spectrum disorder, here's a typical classroom for Mr. Bones and Mrs. Elliott, whoever is the teacher and the aide who knows. Here's the dry erase board. What kind of things do you think Mr. Bones and Mrs. Elliott thought about when they set up their classroom with their 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's see here, 5 by 4, their 20 students, in order to help their classroom be as flexible and able to flow as much as possible? We got some lab stations here. We got some water for cleaning stations. We got an equipment station over here. So this is obviously some sort of a science class. We got first aid station. We got the class pet over here. And we got a computer station. So the class is pretty well set up so that they can directly look over here at the teacher. What are some things that could possibly be distracting for a student who might have an autism disorder? Well, if they have their student here, let's say, what is it? Let's go with, I'm having a hard time reading. Let's just go with Dean here in the back corner. The back corner, that's where the bad kids go, right? The back corner. Well, let's say Dean here is misunderstood and he's underdiagnosed. He has autism, but people don't know it. And he's just always looking out the window. Always looking out the window, not paying attention. And maybe he comes over here and goes, ooh, look at the pretty fish. We got Philip over here. Yada, yada, yada. Well, if Dean's doing that, what's some of the things you could probably do? You might be able to move him back over here into the front corner where he can pay more attention to Mr. Bones while he's teaching. And maybe being over here by the lab station with less distractions might be helpful. Though, maybe all of a sudden we have Mary over here who just wants to start tapping her foot all the time, and then that's starting to drive him wild over here. Lots of different little pitfalls and pratfalls we got to think about when we're talking about our classrooms for these things. Maybe Dean over here, you had him over here in the first place because him and Nikki were having some issues over here at the front, and you decided to move him over here in order to get rid of that. But now he's doing these new things. Always kind of whack-a-mole in it when we're talking about this kind of stuff. But, this is a pretty good classroom environment. I'd say this is a good little setup for this science class where the students are able to give as much of their attention to the teachers as possible, and all the distracting stuff is off to the side and the back in order to help give better instruction practices. Is there anything you can think of that might help this be better? Anything you can think of that would make this worse? I can definitely think of worse. But, that's kind of a good idea for a good, clean environment there for a student who might have an autism diagnosis. I'm going to stop my recording here. We're going to have a second recording. My wife just called me for dinner, and I am hungry. Anyway, be back for that second recording.